10 years ago, Canada's defence spending fell to less than 1% of GDP. It has since doubled in cash terms, but it's still not close enough to face these mounting risks. The brave women and men who are protecting our sovereignty do not have the resources they need for a riskier world. Our military infrastructure and equipment have aged, hindering our military preparedness. And so for all those reasons, I'm announcing today that Canada will achieve NATO's 2% of GDP target this year, half a decade ahead of schedule.
That was Prime Minister Mark Carney today, saying his government is ready to foot the bill to solve some of the pressing issues facing the Canadian Armed Forces and to meet the NATO GDP spending target while he's at it. The Chief of Defence Staff, Jennie Carignan, is here with reactions. She joins me now. General, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here.
Nice to see you, David. Thanks for having me.
So Mark Carney says that by March of next year, Canada's defence spending will be at 2%. Where will the Canadian Armed Forces be by March of next year?
I think we will have had with the increased investment, we are talking about leveraging our people, really. It's enabling us to do our daily jobs in a more effective manner. So really a big portion of the investments are going towards people. It's healthcare, it's training, it's additional resources for recruitment. It's housing, it's infrastructure as well. So a lot of those basic foundational aspects that we require to enable our service members to do their jobs.
Okay, I'm not downplaying the significance and importance of any of those things when I ask you this, but those are important things to have. It gets us to the 2% target. But what does that do to boost the capabilities and readiness of the Canadian Armed Forces? Because this has been the criticism from NATO, is that we're not able to mobilize enough to deliver.
So it is absolutely about funding readiness, because, for example, many of our equipment cannot be fixed because you don't have enough spare parts. So now with increased investments, you can actually have the spare parts available when it's time to fix the various platforms. So it's about giving the mechanic the wrench required and a spare part to fix, whether it's a aircraft or a vehicle. So again, increasing our level of readiness. So all of this is foundational, and this is often where we've had to make very difficult decisions. But again, in order to expand the forces, in order to have recruiting and retention and enough personnel to onboard the additional capabilities also that are already programmed to happen, we need to have a strong workforce that's able to do this.
But when the Prime Minister said today only one of our 4 submarines is seaworthy, this doesn't get 4 out of 4 seaworthy, right? This is about having the maintenance capacity for already broken pieces or things that break to get them back in order. I mean, when do the big spends come on new submarines and expanding the capacity on an equipment level?
So a portion of those increased investments are also going towards specific capabilities which we were not able to have at full capacity. So additional armored vehicles, additional guns, and so on and so forth. So that allows us to actually go after those capabilities that are already existing, that we can actually have at full capacity.
Right, but this isn't the big, we've been talking about buying new submarines and looking at AUKUS and various things over the number of years. This is not what this is. That is down the road, right, for those big purchases, yes?
Of course, there's additional clauses, additional spaces in the budget in the future to be able to do that. I think what needs to be absolutely clear on those investments is that it's not just for 1 year. So it's a predictable, stable funding envelope that allows us to continually building. Not only that, but it sends signals as well to the industry to allow us again to exploit that potential that rests within our Canadian industries.
Right. Okay, so last year I think we saw a report that the forces were about 16,000 personnel short of where they needed to be. The plan now is to recruit about 13,000. There are training challenges, though, to get people ready so they can be deployed. And we've seen some reporting from that because of the slow pace and the bottleneck, people kind of leave the forces and retention isn't working. So how do you address that? Because hiring people is one thing, but getting them ready to serve is another. And if there's bottlenecks at both of those things, you don't actually hold on to people. So how does this change things?
So this is exactly what this increased funding will help us do, is actually increase our capacity to train more people and have the resources available to do just that. Of course, over this past year, we have surpassed our recruiting targets, so for the first time in 10 years. And we've also grown the CAF by 2,000, again, that's a first for the past 10 years. So we are having success with the new initiatives we have set into place. And we've also designed the training aspect that follows that to ensure that we can train the additional personnel in an effective manner. So again, that funding is going to be absolutely key in allowing to be successful in doing that.
The money is one thing, the trainers is another, right? And a lot of the capacity would be helping with Operation Unifier in Ukraine and also in Latvia and these places. So how do you get the trainers you need to move the recruits through at the scale required?
So we have various options available to us. So we have our reserve force members that we call forward for full-time service. So they greatly enable us to do that. There are currently 9,000 reserve force members serving in a full-time capacity. So this is a significant amount of effort from the reserve forces. And we can also look at civilian instructors that can help us in that space as well.
Okay, but are those people there at the scale you need to hit the targets that have been laid out here?
Yes, they are. So again, it's making choices and addressing priorities and then sequencing our efforts.
So one of the challenges is readiness, right? We've seen reports about almost half of the equipment is deemed unavailable and unserviceable. Going back to the submarines, only 1 in 4 of the submarines are seaworthy. By the end of this year, the fiscal year, when we get to the NATO 2% target, what do you expect the readiness percentage to be of the total Canadian Armed Forces from where it is now?
Well, our goal is always to be in the 80% plus. So we will see how this is proceeding, but we are looking at increasing that readiness aspect. So with access to spare parts, with access to everything we need to make sure that our platforms are functioning, this is great. This is going to be greatly enabling.
It seems remarkable to me, General, that in 2025 and 3 years into a ground war in Europe, where NATO has been sort of like backstopping Ukraine, that we're at a point where we're talking about budgets for spare parts and training. It seems like this should have been there a long, long time ago for a G7 NATO military force.
And again, that's why it was urgent that that funding be provided, so to enable again our service members to do their job properly. So hence, really the focus on the foundational aspect, but also a more comprehensive approach, I would say, overall to defense, because the industry is also incorporated as part of that funding envelope, as well as our colleagues, CSIS, CSC, and the Coast Guard, all are security apparatus that can be leveraged to, again, counter the threats that we see in this very complex world.
Okay, that leads me to where I wanted to go next, because it's 2% spending on defense. It's not 2% of GDP spent on the Canadian Armed Forces, right? It broadens out quite a bit from there. The communications, security establishment, Coast Guard, as you mentioned, and defense industrial development. There's been some question about the math, because it was like a $39 billion line item for the armed forces, $9 billion added in, but there's another $13 or $14 billion that's being pulled in from DFO, Global Affairs, the RCMP even, to get Canada to the 2%. So how should people view that? Because it is not that you suddenly have a budget of $62 billion to run the Canadian Armed Forces, right? It's not that level of readiness and capabilities. It's a bundle of things gone together that people kind of question the accounting there, of whether it's really the level of military readiness Canada needs.
So the methodology that we use to account for that is the same as with all of our NATO allies. So there's a specific definition for defense into which you can account for defense spending. So we have always had various other defense organizations contributing to defense, and that portion is accounted as part of defense. And it's the same accounting for all NATO allies. But I need to be absolutely clear, what is coming to the CAF is a significant amount coming to us that is going to be enabling us in actually providing the defense that Canadians need.
Well, there is the $9 billion in round numbers of new money announced today, but the other money from the other departments that's being thrown into the calculation, a lot of that has been there for years and years and years. It's only now being added to the math. And if this is consistent with the way other NATO countries do it, and I know there's a lot of room, you know, in the 2% accounting practices, why weren't those put into the figure in years past?
They were put into the figures in the years past. So, for example, the work that we do with the Coast Guard in the maritime domain surveillance related to sovereignty operations, this was accounted for into the overall defense spending envelope, and so on and so forth for all others. So they were already part of the accounting because, again, that correlates to the NATO definition for defense spending.
So just as a final question, General, there is money here for pay raises, compensation for members of the Canadian Armed Forces. Is this an across-the-board salary increase? Is this retention bonuses? How is that going to be used? And what message do you think people thinking about joining the Armed Forces or thinking about leaving the Armed Forces take from the commitment outlined today?
So the commitment is definitely towards people. So people are very much at the center of the commitment made today, of which pay raises and additional benefits are going to be part of it. So it's a very broad envelope of, again, support for CAF members to do their jobs.
But do you think this will keep the people who are maybe frustrated after a number of tough years, keep them inside?
I can tell you that we saw today a lot of very encouraged and happy CAF members who understands the message of support and respect for the work that they are doing, and it is hugely appreciated.
Jennie Carignan, Chief of the Defence Staff, always a pleasure. Thank you for coming in on a busy day.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as Prime Minister Mark Carney commits to getting Canada to that 2% NATO target, Conservatives say they want the government to show how it plans to pay for it.
We're calling on the government to bring in a budget, because all of this will require a budget that not only puts this money forward, clearly identifies where it comes from, but cuts waste in bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, corporate welfare, and other areas, so that the necessary increase in the military does not come as an inflationary burden on the backs of our Canadian taxpayers.
All right, the Power Panel is here to weigh in on that and all the other news today. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Vandana Cotter was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP, and we're getting them wired up here right now. The general had to leave. It's Rob Russo, the Canada correspondent for The Economist. So we'll go to Rob. As soon as you can actually hear him, we get them wired up. Lisa, let's start with you. I mean, what do you make of this move? A 2% by the end of this year, and then a signal that there will be more to come after that. What do you make of it?
I think it's definitely the right time to do that. I don't think that he's very, very far from, meaning the Prime Minister. That was the Liberal platform, and they're making an announcement on the Liberal platform. They've put a number to it, which I think is good. But I'm going to pick up on what the Conservatives just said, which is you really do need to see that number in the context of a bigger budget. And as these announcements are going to roll out probably over the summer of this much money here, this much money there, we do deserve to have an understanding and a bigger picture as to where the money is going to come from. How much more are we going to borrow as a result of everything we're going to have to do? Because you just can't make it up. The money's got to come from somewhere. It's either it's going to come from another place in the government, or it's going to come through higher taxes, or it's going to come through borrowing. So it'd be great to see that whole thing in context. It'd be nice to have that before the summer, especially since they're making these announcements. But looks like the government's not going to do it until the fall.
Yeah, that's certainly what the Prime Minister said. We're kind of getting it in reverse, Vandana, that we're getting the details up front, and then we'll get the tables in the fall. And your mileage may vary on whether you think that's appropriate or not. But what do you make of this move today, the promise to get to 2%, and signaling certainly to the domestic defense industries there's probably going to be some more spending down the road?
I think it shows that's now necessary in these very tough geopolitical times, that things are probably moving faster than we even know as Canadians. I think it shows that even more now than ever that we need to step up a bit more. Canada has always been well respected around the world. We've done a lot of work in terms of supporting Ukraine and other missions around the world. But that with the U.S. pulling back on some of their commitments and pulling back from international institutions, that it's time for Canada to step up, not just to protect ourselves and Canadians and our sovereignty, but also to signal for our industry. And we heard the Prime Minister talking about it's going to be a signal to our industry, to our suppliers, but also to our CAF, to our allies, and to those who may not be aligned with us as where Canada's going to step up. And I think it's probably important now, but it also tells you the kind of geopolitical times that we're living in.
But, Vandana, help me understand, like the commitment to 2% was made in 2014. It was going to be met by 2030, and now March. What's going on?
You know, when I was talking to colleagues about this, like former colleagues and current colleagues, and just thinking that something's definitely shifting. And I think that's made this necessary move happen. And I think, defense spending can help move a lot of things around. It's good for our personal industries, it's good for our suppliers, but to signal to the world where we're at. So what I'm thinking is the Prime Minister have had a lot of conversations, like every time, I think almost every day, I get a readout from another ally or another head of state or somebody that he talks to. We also know he's been talking to the President on a regular basis. So all of this is telling me that is a signal to him that this needs to move faster. I know this was a conversation we had even during leadership. Chrystia Freeland had a certain time, Mark Carney had another time. This tells me that through his conversations, he feels like, nope, you know what, we can't wait. This has to be now. So it tells me that there's an urgency to this that I think that we have to be aware of.
Brad, it is a remarkable shift in priority. Suddenly there are billions to be found for the Canadian Armed Forces, now still billions shy of where it needs to be on an equipment and procurement and capability thing. But what do you make of just the shift and the urgency that was laid out today by the Prime Minister on this?
Well, David, company's coming. We gotta put on our best here. We've got the relatives coming over. We've got extended friends and family coming over. The G7 is merely days away here. This has been, to varying degrees, this has been, rather embarrassing. And it never made any sense when Trudeau said, we're going to get to 2% in multiple years from now. Those that want to get you there now are unhappy, and all these elected officials within the NATO go, you know what, there could be 3 or 4 changes of government. You folks can't build ships, you can't buy subs, you can't do much. Will you get to this target in multiple years from now? So I think that this sets up Carney. I think there's a number of things that are happening. Today's defense announcement is one of them, the acceleration to 2%. And I think for a lot of Canadians, I certainly, when the government says we can't get there any faster, you think, well, is this ideological or is there something there? When Trump made all that noise about our borders and the fentanyl and how little fentanyl was. It was never about fentanyl. And all of a sudden, within like a day and a half, it's like, okay, we've got billions of dollars for the border security to take that last little bit of fentanyl out of the southern, being taken into the United States from the north. So, there's a lot of surprises here. I think it maybe eats away at credibility of when politicians say something can't be done, and then all of a sudden, with a change of priorities. But this is all in light of the G7. There's a number of things I think that Carney wants to do at that G7. This takes that 2% off the menu, so that he can focus on other things.
Yeah, Rob, I think Brad is onto something there, right? Because you don't want to host Trump, Zelensky, and a bunch of NATO allies and not have the commitment made that they've all been looking for.
Yeah, but while we snap our suspenders because we're getting the 2% in a hurry, our rich cousins and uncles are coming over. They're spending 3.5% to 5% immediately because of the threat in their own backyard. So this isn't just about the G7, it's also about the NATO summit that comes a couple of weeks
and the
later
EU
on.
and all of it.
That's right. And so what does it do? I think Vandana used a very good word. It sends signals. Signal to Trump. Yes, you're a malign presence, but you're not wrong about NATO defense spending outside of the United States. You're right. We have ignored our own defense. The Europeans have taken for granted that the United States would be there to protect them. A signal to Trump in another way as well. We are in profound negotiations with them at a late stage on a very broad agreement that goes beyond a trade agreement. We have money to spend, we're saying to President Trump. We are going to spend some of it in the United States, or maybe we don't if you don't give us the deal you want. So it's not a bad signal to spend to him. The interesting signal that I thought for the first time I heard the Prime Minister use the word sacrifice. I heard the Prime Minister explain why a sacrifice would be necessary. And he said, in essence, geography does not provide us the protection that it has. I mean, it's a myth. I think a lot of people refer to our Arctic as the empty attic of North America. That's a myth. But that attic now is very vulnerable. And I think the Prime Minister's probably gotten intelligence briefings that have told him how vulnerable that is. So it's also, I think, a signal to Canadians that we have to get serious about our own defense, independent of President Trump.
So on sacrifice, Robert, because I've heard you've mentioned this a couple of times on the show, and the Prime Minister said it today, and he was asked about it. I think Jeff Gray asked him about it today.
Right.
The specifics were not there in terms of what it meant. He did rule out the idea of raising taxes because he wants, but they are going through a cost reduction process in government right now, eyeing savings, cuts and layoffs and job reductions is what it sounds like by the fall. I mean, is this what we're talking about, like shifting away from core government to things like the military?
He didn't mumble what would be required, but he came close to mumbling.
Yeah.
He didn't exactly highlight it.
Yeah.
What he said was, yes, we do need to look for savings. We need to grow the economy. He tried to say that's what the one Canadian economy thing is all about. But
also the defense spending. They're linking that to industrial policy.
That's right. And he needed to, he mentioned savings. Okay, savings is a code word for we gotta slash some spending elsewhere. He drew a line, but he also said, when asked about social programs, something that I don't think would have ever come out of the mouth of Justin Trudeau: we cannot redistribute what we don't have.
Yeah,
so
he's been saying that for a while, like
Yeah.
in his Canada 2020 speeches, but he's not wrong.
No, in other words, we got to be able to pay for this stuff, and that means we're going to have to cut elsewhere.
So, Lisa, what signals do you take from that as a former cabinet minister who now works for a big bank? You know, that when he's talking about cost savings, and sort of shifting priorities, I mean, what do you take on that on the defense side, and where Mark Carney's going to go in the next little while?
Well, it's like I said at the top, David. I mean, there's only three ways that you can get money in the government to reprioritize. You can either cut something within the government operations, you can raise taxes, or you can borrow. That's it. Those are your three levers. So clearly he's saying he's probably going to do a little bit of, maybe not the raising taxes because he's just cut taxes, but certainly of the other two. That's what he's going to have to turn to. But can I just point out how ironic all of this is, considering it was only 2014 when Justin Trudeau accused the Conservatives of wanting to whip out their CF-18s. And here we are with a Prime Minister who is definitely looking at this more in terms of might is the right way to go in terms of our defense. What a shame that we lost 10 years. Well,
On that, though, Lisa, is it because of just what's happened in the United States? Like the things Mark Carney said today, he responded kind of neutrally to the steel and aluminum tariffs. Like, this isn't aimed at us. Let's see where it goes. But today he was like, monetizing their hegemony, charging for access to their markets. Like, calibrating the response to Trump is dicey because I don't know if they would have liked what he had to say today about that.
Perhaps, but I think that the issue with respect to military spending in this country has been one that has been dogging a Canadian government all the way back to Mr. Chrétien, quite frankly, and it's one that we've never properly addressed. There's been fits and starts of trying to do it, but right now, this government, I believe, is going to try to do it. Now, making announcements and actually actioning the items are two different things. We know that.
Yep.
That's one of the lessons you get from cabinet. It's hard to actually execute and implement and get these things along their way, but they seem to want to make an attempt to do so. And I would say that, here's the key for me and where the connection with the United States is important, which is right now, China has a chokehold on all of the minerals and materials that go into the F-35. It's actually a kill switch for them. The rare earths and the critical minerals that are needed for the magnets and the sensors all come from China. And China can stop and regulate how much comes out. But guess what other country actually can supply all of these things for the F-35? That would be Canada.
Yeah.
So when the Prime Minister talks about critical minerals, it really is sending a very clear signal to the United States. We understand your problems with supply chain for the F-35. We are closer than Australia. We are much closer than Ukraine, and we are the ones to turn to. So I think he's making a pitch in that kind of way as well.
Vandana, the 2% target, I think a lot of people will be relieved that Canada is living up to its word, even as others move to a whole other level. But here we are in 2025, 11 years after that commitment was made. And some of this money is just basic spare parts, to fix a truck when the engine goes. And it's just, it kind of strikes me that it's a huge step forward that basic maintenance can be done on a military with about a 50% readiness level across its hardware. That's it says something about the state it's gotten to.
Yeah, and I think even despite all that, Canada has lived up to a lot of expectations they've had around the world, across missions around the world. But I think this Prime Minister's priorities is to increase this and to also increase support for our CAF and show our allies that we are going to, conduct our foreign, policy through a position of strength. And part of that means building ourselves up. And maybe we didn't need to all this time. Maybe we did. We were still a great ally and supported a number of projects around the world. But now we can't depend on some of our main allies like we have in the past. It's a new era here, and I think the Prime Minister is setting up Canada to make sure that this is the time to build this, and I think it's part of his broader vision for what Canada should be, and it also signals to where we are in the world. Yes, maybe Donald Trump isn't the president a few years from now, but who knows, this rhetoric may stay there. Right. The U.S., once you pull out of geopolitics the way they are pulling out, it's hard to get back in there. And I think that he's preparing Canada to we're going to take a bigger space in this world. And one of the things when I look at the G7, he says protecting our communities and around the world. So it's about where else we can come protection, what other allies are we can come support, and I think that's what he's setting us up for.
Okay, Lisa, I got to come to you because you look really skeptical. I can see it. Quickly, go ahead.
That is wishful thinking. That is great wishful thinking for Canada to step up in any vacuum that the United States leaves behind. Why not? Because we don't have a standing military that's able to even do the Haiti mission right now.
But maybe we can. Maybe we can build that.
Maybe.
Why shouldn't we have those desires for our country? Even if it seems skeptical, and I totally understand, Lisa, why it seems skeptical, because it doesn't seem natural as Canadians to do that. We're peacekeepers, but maybe it's the time that we gotta change that, because if not, who else? So I don't mind the Prime Minister's aspirations to do this and the desire to do this. I think that's good for Canadians, and I think it's a signal to Canadians that maybe this is where we're gonna have to be. Okay. Maybe this is where we have to shift.
Okay, for more on this, more Conservative reaction to Mark Carney's plan to hike defence spending, we've got James Bezan. He is the Conservative National Defence Critic. Mr. Bezan, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
So you're in favour of reaching the NATO target. What do you make of this plan to get there by the end of this fiscal year?
Well, this is why we need a budget, and this is why we need actually the National Defence Committee to be set up so that we can actually study the estimates. Right now we can't do that. We haven't organized committees, but there is a lot of questions on how we get there, but we are very supportive of honoring our NATO commitment, 2%. If we can get there by the end of this year, that's great, because we need to re-equip and recruit and rearm our military. It suffered a lot under Justin Trudeau and the same Liberal team. So we are concerned about that we need to make sure that after this lost Liberal decade that we're going to actually stand up and be counted amongst our allies. But first and foremost, we're going to defend Canadian sovereignty and protect Canadians here at home, and that means making the proper investments. And so, we want to see exactly how this is all going to play out, and that's why we need to have a budget so Canadians know where this money is coming from, how it's going to be spent, and ultimately, the estimates are out, both the main estimates and now supplementary A estimates.
Yep.
Our National Defence Committee should be studying in depth how that money is being spent to make sure that we are getting the things that we need to defend Canada and support our troops at the same time.
What are the big questions there? Because I take your point, right? There are no committees to look at this stuff, and we're not going to get a budget until early in the fall is the time frame that we're being given right now. $9 billion in new defense money, the money for recruitment and retention and support programs for the CAF. That sounds like, pay raises for soldiers and civilian personnel, maybe training and retention money. Some money there for Ukraine, defense research, repairs and infrastructure, which are badly needed. What are sort of the big questions you have, though, about the details of that $9 billion?
So on, the easy thing to do is salary increases,
right?
And hopefully that'll help with the retention side of the equation. We have questions on how they're going to go about doing the training, because right now, we're 13,000 troops, according to the government's own announcement this morning. We're 13,000 troops short on the recruitment.
And there are bottlenecks in the training and onboarding to this point,
10,000
right?
troops are undertrained and undeployable. And a lot of them, as we saw in a report that came out just a couple of weeks ago, that a lot of those have been sitting around in furlough waiting to get trained up, have gotten bored and left. So, we need to make sure that those people are stayed around, that are kept there. Their training is coming in a planned way, that they know when they're going to get into their trades and be able to fill the roles within the Canadian Armed Forces that's so desperately needed right now. So, we want to see how they're going to go about, part of the problem is you got to train the trainers to train the recruits.
Yep.
And so how is that going to take place? Because so many of our guys are deployed in Latvia, are part of Operation Unifier at Camp Lid in the UK, training Ukrainian troops. So where is this new surge of trainers going to come from? Is it civilian? Is it veterans? Those are questions that have to be
tap into retirees and people like that maybe could come back on contract. But, in terms of what this money accomplishes, just because there's a bit of math here, to NATO math, that gets a bit complicated about hitting the 2%. But the $9 billion, it seems like this is a kind of stop the bleeding, at least on the staffing side, and try to boost the readiness levels in the short term. It doesn't solve the only one of 4 submarines can work. It doesn't solve, a lot of the problems with the land equipment readiness. Like, that is billions of dollars and years away still, it seems.
Yeah, and like how much longer we have to wait until we replace the CF-18s? Those fighter jets are barely in the air now because of their age, because of the lack of spare parts, the lack of people that are actually trained to be able to do the maintenance on them, never mind the pilots to fly them. So, we might have, 88 CF-18 sitting around, but I'd be surprised if half of them are even in the air at any point in time. So, there's those questions that have to be answered. And, we as Conservatives believe that we have to protect Canada. Those investments have to happen. They have to happen now. We have to make sure that we're at full strength to deal with the threat environment that we're currently facing. Not just what we are witnessing, in the Middle East, or what we're witnessing in Ukraine with Russia's illegal invasion and their aggression and genocidal nature of the war there, but also being prepared for what the future war looks like. And so investing in drone technology and quantum computing and those
Cyber,
things
those are there,
also
at least the
included.
starts of it, right?
But as Conservatives, again, that's important because the way we fought in the past is going to be different than the way we fight in the future. But at the same time, it's asymmetrical warfare. The equipment that we've had in the past still are in play, as we witnessed in Ukraine. Tanks are still very important. Our Leopard tanks are in disrepair. Our LAVs, we need to continue to replace them. Other armored vehicles are taking years because of the procurement bottlenecks that have happened under the mismanagement of the Liberals. So, it's about making sure we get that equipment. Never mind warships. We're still, these were ordered when we were government, and they're still not even cutting steel on them.
The defense procurement has been a problem for, going back to the 80s, right? Like on all kinds of levels of government and strikes. But there's $2 billion here to try to build up domestic capacity, or at least, reinforce domestic capacity for production. The Prime Minister talked today about there is still the relationship with the U.S., but we're not going to send 75 cents on the defense dollar to the U.S. anymore. What can $2 billion do to sort of build out domestic military industrial capacity in your view?
So our defense industry is going to welcome the investment. Whether it's enough is to be seen. The retooling that has to take place. Case in point, when the hot war in Ukraine broke out 3 and a bit years ago, one thing that we need to send, and what all allies need to send Ukraine, was artillery shells,
munitions,
the M155s. And here we are 3 years since that happened, and we're still not increasing the production of our artillery shells in this country. So munitions, rockets, ammo, those are all required by the Canadian Armed Forces. We don't have on stock right now enough munitions to deal with a war for 3 days. We're going to run out with what's on stock. So we have to help our industry retool, upscale production so that we can actually take care of ourselves and also be reliable suppliers to our allies.
So look, as a final point, I know you want a budget to see where this fits into the bigger financial picture, the deficit projections, the economic projections. And I know it puts parliamentarians in a tough spot
Canadians
to vote for
deserve
things.
a budget, not just us, but Canadians deserve it.
I know, but this has to get voted on before Parliament breaks for the summer, whenever that is, and we're not going to see a budget until the fall. Given the information you have and what has been outlined, is this something Conservatives can support?
So at first blush, yes, but again, we're only talking about Department of National Defense. And just case to point is that that's $9 billion, but they need to find about $18 billion to get to the NATO 2%. So where is the other spending coming from in other departments?
It seems like they think they're going to get credit for Coast Guard stuff in global affairs, RCMP, Veterans Affairs, like a bunch of things that was on the books that was never calculated in it before is suddenly going to count.
Coast Guard has been calculated in. Right. Veterans pensions have been calculated. Ever since 2017, they changed the math. They did the creative accounting, which is allowed under NATO, and they've added in. That's how they've got from, their actual defense spending last year was just over 1%, 1.01, and they're at 1.34 because of the extras. Even Global Affairs Canada, on their conflict resolution, the Liberals have taken and added in. So, Trudeau was very good at creative accounting. So the question becomes, on these other departments, how is it affecting our defense spend, but also, what is it doing from the standpoint of border security, national security, and national defense? And the Canadian Coast Guard is a civilian organization. So if they're moving it under national defense, and by the sounds of it, that's what's going to happen.
I think it's staying in DFO, but the money is being counted. There's some confusion on that, because in the technical briefing they said it was DFO, but...
So how can their environmental program and their environment ships, that they have out there and doing those studies count as national defense spending? How does the work that they're doing in ice breaking for transit through the our Arctic seaways as well as through the St. Lawrence Seaway count as defense spending? I don't get it.
Yeah.
They aren't doing interdiction for illegal smuggling or human trafficking or illicit drugs. That doesn't happen right now. So how does that count as national security? Those are things that we have questions about, and that's why we have to look at the bigger picture before we say yay, nay on the stand-up vote.
Okay. James Bezan, Conservative National Defense Critic. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in today.
Anytime, David.
Kerry Buck is a former Canadian ambassador to NATO, and she joins me now. Kerry Buck, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Hi, my pleasure.
It's been years of people pressuring Canada and other NATO countries to get to 2%. Now they're talking about going to 5%. How do you think the news of Canada's plan today is going to be received amongst the NATO members?
Well, Canada's catching up to a world that had already changed, and the gap between what our allies were doing on security and defense and what we were prepared to do had been growing pretty wide over the last few years, many years, honestly, since the standard was first set in 2006. So I think it will be, the 2% will be received with a sigh of relief from a lot of our allies and an immediate expectation that we have to do more.
I spoke with the U.S. Ambassador, Pete Hoekstra, earlier in the show, and he had positive things to say about this announcement today by the Prime Minister. How do you think the Pentagon and the State Department are going to react to Canada finally getting to the 2% target?
I don't think they'll be surprised. There was a lot of messages. It's what was delivered today in the speech and then in the supplementary estimates is pretty consistent with some of the promises made during the election campaign. I don't think they'll be surprised, but I think they'll obviously be pleased. But this isn't just about the US. Because we had been underspending on defense and being so far away from that NATO standard, so far away from the NATO aspiration and so far away from what our allies were doing, we'd created an extra vulnerability for ourselves, not just with Trump, but with the other allies at the table. I mean, I heard it up close and personal when I was posted, sitting at the North Atlantic Council from allies. I saw it from allied defense ministers, foreign ministers. We needed to step up. I loved the announcement today. I think it's really visionary. It's a bit of a mic drop moment for me.
Okay, you call it visionary and a mic drop moment, but some of this is it seems to me, and help me if I'm wrong here, foundational stuff like training and recruitment, parts for maintenance. Like these seems like this is the bread and butter of an organization the size of the Canadian Armed Forces, right? That we're just kind of getting it to that level. I mean, what does this do in terms of increasing Canada's ability to respond to something on behalf of the alliance should something as catastrophic as Article 5 need to be invoked? I mean, is it just raising the floor of it, or are we now a much more significant player in NATO?
Well, it's a hard question you're answering because we've actually done some good and hard jobs at NATO all along. But the fact is we've been rusting out our equipment and hollowing out our people in the Canadian Armed Forces for a few decades. The last time we reached this level of defense spending was about 1989, 1990. So I said it was a mic drop moment because I was really happy to see us step up. But on the other hand, it was about 2 decades too late. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, look, housing is important for the Canadian Armed Forces to have. It doesn't make the capabilities, now maybe it helps you with retention and recruitment, and then the training allows you, you have to get the Canadian Armed Forces to the state of readiness where they can be deployed, because this has been one of the persistent challenges there. But, you know, we'll see, right, how that works in terms of what the readiness percentage is by April 1 of next year. But also the signal on the defense industrial policy, that suggests some pretty big change coming there. The shift away from the United States to more self-reliance and partnership with Europe. What do you take away from that direction the Prime Minister signaled?
Well, it's going to be a really fine balance, right? You need to recognize the degree to which our existing procurements, our existing kit, plus our procurements that are in train are still locked in with the United States. And you don't want to slow down your procurement to make a political point, but at the same time, we really do have to diversify. So watch this space. What happened today in the supplementary estimates was a significant chunk of cash, but I expect to see post-summit, when the leaders agree on that new target of 3.5% on pure defense-related equipment, and then an additional 1.5% on security, related to defense. I expect to see after that, including in the budget, heading to the budget, some big ticket procurements. And then it'll be really interesting to see what can be done to help Canadian defense industry not just grow domestically, but also enter that market in Europe as Europe increases its defense spending. The amount that was announced in the supplementary estimates and in Prime Minister Carney's speech today to support Canadian defense industry is almost a down payment in our getting into new initiatives inside Europe to pool defense and R&D, which is a good thing for us, right? It's cheaper procurement of kit. You amortize the R&D costs across a much wider pool of buyers, but there are a lot of steps to happen before Canadian defense industry is ready and the EU is willing to let us into those markets.
The percentages sound very small, right? 2% of GDP. 3.5% of GDP, but when the GDP is $3 trillion, those numbers get really big. Like this is $63 billion at 2%. If you're looking at an annual sustained defense spend of 3.5%, that's $110 billion, right? That is more than transfers to seniors in this country. I mean, can a country the size of Canada, with the social programs we have, get to that level and sustain that level, or is there a way to do the capital expenditures and the upgrading that it sort of gets you there, but it's not an everyday, you know what I mean, not an everyday out of your operating budget approach?
Yeah. Yes, Canada can get there. I mean, we're relatively rich. Our defense spending in real dollar terms compared to other NATO allies, we, to do our share, we have to do more. And it is, the Prime Minister was right, it is in Canadians' interests. We're Canadians, I don't know if they realize it yet, but Canadians are feeling directly the negative effects of this new security environment. If you don't send the message to your adversaries that you're ready to deter and defend your own home defense, then they feel more open to doing that sub-threshold aggression that doesn't look military, but certainly has a real security impact. Foreign interference,
cyber,
capacity,
propaganda, misinformation, all of that.
Yeah, but also our critical infrastructure, it's not a good place to be if through cyber attacks or some other means that an adversary would be able to take down some of your critical infrastructure. And that's kind of the world we're in now, including, alongside a few of our European allies. So yes, it'll cost a lot. Europeans like Germany, others are in the same boat as us, and yet they're stepping up because they feel the threat more directly and acutely. The threat's just as direct to us. We just haven't kind of woken up to it. I thought we would after Russia's full-scale attempted invasion of Ukraine, and for some reason we didn't. So I'm happy to see that we're catching up to a world, as I said, that's already changed.
Yeah, no, it's a good point about proximity. Whenever we talk to the Polish ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador, anyone from the Baltic states, they get it. They have very clear eyes on this stuff. Kerry Buck, former Canadian ambassador to NATO. We always appreciate the time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks very much.